So I'm just going to introduce this one quickly. Capturing service requirements, why should you do it, right? So just quickly take a little bit of a step back, the role of the service designer, right? Your role as a service designer is to bridge the gap between the networking constructs down in the network land and the product constructs, right? That product might be an internal product if you're kind of enterprise. It might even be internal if you're an SP, and like an infrastructure service or an infrastructure product, or it may actually be something that you sell. So the service model is kind of, may not completely bridge that. There's probably an order management system that helps bridge this gap too, but it's a big part of that. So you kind of sit there and you go, well, slides again. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so what are our products, right? Then you ask, how are our customer-facing services structured to support those products? What are the RFS, resource-facing services that make up those products? What are the configs? How do we then deliver those configs to the network? What are the moves? What are the changes? What are the things we can do? How do we build those services? And it kind of goes back to what are our products. So your role as a service modeler, you're kind of going around this cycle, right? It's an iterative process. Colin, in his opening notes, talked yesterday, top down, bottom up. I'm a believer in middle out. Start in the middle, go up to the product guys, going back down to the network, right? You're bouncing between the two. Bottom up, you take a perspective of the network. Top down, you take the business perspective. But if you start in the middle, you probably have a better hope of bridging between the two. Most of you have probably seen this, right? Why should we spend time on requirements? Well, what the customer explained all the way through to what the customer really needed. Everyone has differences of opinion. Capture your requirements. It's a good thing to do. But we use Agile. I don't have requirements. No waterfall here, right? Requirements are waterfall. But actually, there's a very interesting. I didn't credit this, but interesting chart. And basically, if this is waterfall, right? You spend a lot of time doing nothing, and then suddenly you produce something. And you've got some value. And this is Agile done properly. From the very beginning of the process, you're generating value. But to do that, you need a good definition of done. You really need to know what does done look like. If you don't have a good definition of done, with Agile, you make a huge amount of progress initially. You just go off running and you're making stuff happen, stuff's working. And you capture a lot of value, but then over time you start slowing down and you find, you're probably going to end up in a worse place because you've had to redesign and work around bad decisions in the code that if maybe you'd done it a bit more structured, you wouldn't have done. So, why capture detailed requirements for Agile? So, it gives you a better understanding. It's going to help you get sign-off from the networking team. When you want to go live, you give them your requirements to say this is what we're doing. At least you get your naming standards in one place, right? Number of customers that I've worked with say, oh yeah, we have these naming standards. Okay, where are they? Oh, 15 different documents. Go find them. You don't have a common place for naming standards? No, not really. Well, okay, let's document them. Let's put them in one place. And you can capture the variations and document them, and really test writing becomes easier, and your knowledge transfer becomes easier at the end of the project. And then key to your config evolution and the life cycle of what you're building becomes tracked. So you shouldn't treat them as a point-in-time requirement. They should evolve as you evolve your service. Now, the last thing before I hand over to Sandeep, device configurations are not requirements. So in the software world, there's a specialized discipline called software archaeology. These are people that go and look at code that was written in the 70s and 80s that wasn't well documented, that no one understands, but it's high value code, like might be the mainframe code that runs the bank that you have your current account with. And they go in and they work through the code, they document it, they understand what it's doing, how it's doing it, why it's doing it. They can then rewrite it in a modern language. And I feel a lot of our customers expect us to do configuration archaeology, right? Here's our design documents. They're about 8 years old. Here's the latest configs. They're brand new. That's all the good stuff is in there. Just go read it, figure it out. It's archaeology. Yeah, it's kind of just grab the configs. It's right there. Nothing bad will happen to you. But I think everyone's probably seen the film and knows what happens, right? The network team tries to kill. The temple tries to kill Indiana Jones. But actually, if you end up having to do this, it's a lot more like this, right? It's not glamorous. It's pretty slow, painful. You get dirty. Takes a long time. So don't do this, right? Get some requirements, proper requirements. Don't say configs, design documents, figure out the rest yourself. So with that, I'll hand over to Sandeep to talk about what should you capture as requirements.
Thanks, Mark. I understand your pain. You need to turn it off. I understand your pain listening to Mark for 3 continuous sessions. So here comes the savior. So, as Mark said, that device configs are not requirements. So we'll touch on that more. So how often it happens that you talk to a customer and they have clearly defined requirements and they know what they want and their expectations are already set right? Any guesses? Never. 100 minus 99% times? I'll give 1%. Some customers are. So that's what happens. Yeah. So, and as we all know, capturing proper requirements is key to any successful project, and setting the expectations also correctly, right? So now, as Mark already mentioned, most of the time we go and talk to the customer, here is the map, or here are the device configs, and give me my automation solution. And especially with NSO, that's a big problem. They think, just take the device config and give me the automated solution. But so we do conduct requirements workshop. It may span from 1 day to a week, depending on the size of the project. And we focus on 3 main key stakeholders. Most important, people and organization, the existing processes, and the existing tools, the ecosystem, the entire network. So if we can synchronize these 3, we'll be sitting on the sweet spot over here, and that will be a successful automation deployment. Now, I'll share my experience. So I worked with a tier 1 service provider in USA for almost 3 years. So 3 years back, when we started talking to the planning team, they gave us the requirements. We went through multiple review cycles. We developed the solution. They tested it, accepted it, bingo, go. They handed it over to network team. Oh, they said, no, that's not how we work. Here are the changes. Almost like 20, 30% things change. We went through that cycle again, got the heads up. They handed it over to the operations team. Again, the similar cycle. So lessons learned. Henceforth, any requirements coming from a customer, we create CRD, or the customer requirements document. We bring all the teams on the table, get the sign-on, and then only we proceed with the development. So getting all the roles and responsibilities of various teams involved in automation is very important. Then not only roles and responsibility of the team, what are the governing principles and policies and guidelines for all those teams? We need to understand clearly. So when we then comes the design phase. What are the security requirements, compliance? If it is a customer-facing service, then what can be exposed to the customer? How this it will be deployed in the production? How is the transition going to happen? What are the processes customer follow? Will it coexist with the existing manual or whatever automation or automated or current process? If it's a brownfield, do we need service discovery? What are the validation? How the services are going to be validated by the customers, right? So then, very important post deployment in production. What if there is a problem? Who is going to? What are the processes set by customer? So we need to understand and capture those for successful delivery. As Colin mentioned yesterday, any automation solution, we should think about the bigger picture. We cannot develop solution in silos, right? So we need to understand the ecosystem or the entire network or the bigger picture. Especially suppose if there's a customer facing service, we need to integrate with the billing, CRM, order management. That's how the revenue recognition will happen. And then post deployment, we need to provide the assurance. So it needs to be integrated with the incident management. So understanding the end-to-end solution, that's the key. So these are some of the questions. I mean, there's a big laundry list we go through in a workshop. But the main focus is on the device configs. I mean, don't get me wrong, device configs are important for NSO automation, but those are not the only things. So device configs, and especially we focus on the revenue generating services. Device types, do we have nets for all the devices? What are the vendors covered? What are topology, security concerns, existing automations, do we need HA or not? So what are we trying to solve here, first of all? Definitely there are some pain points which can be solved by automation. Do you remember when we used to order landline and it used to take a few weeks to get it provisioned? It impacts the revenue, bad customer experience, frustration. So time taken per service deployment, and what is the percentage of successful deployments? If an operator is doing it manually, say 10 times a week, there are chances of failure. So we all know automation can expedite deployment. We can reduce manual intervention for make it less error prone, and it's repeatable. So again, with the same customer, we did automation of mobs, and we got 30x reduction in the time of deployment. And we have quotes from the customer. Also, the data center virtualization with a VNF, the manual process used to take 9 months. Now it takes only 2 weeks. So that kind of reduction we got using NSO. So if we focus on these pain points and capture all the requirements correctly, and if we go back to those 3 pie chart, if we synchronize people, processes, on tools, we can embark on the successful automation journey. So with that, I hand it over to Jorge. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. So you've seen some wonderful slides. So which one is forward? Up. So my name is Jorge. I'm working in AS. So this is a bit noisy. So I've been doing NSO for the best part of 2 years, and I'm going to present to you some best practices we've been refining during these 2 years. So this doesn't mean that this is the right way to go. There may be many, but these have gone through some, big projects, and we can say that those are reliable, right? So I want to make an exercise for all of you to think of yourselves as the person that is going to stay in the customer after the kickoff meeting is ended. So you are staying there, and now what, right? So you have to think of the customer as starting a transformation journey. And it means transformation in the sense of change of mindset, change of procedures, and even change of organization structure. So as any big transformation, it can be really traumatic for them. And your role there is to guide through this process and to be the helping hand here, okay? So I've only worked on this side of the field. I hear the other side is quite nice, but I'm not this is my playground, right? So this is where this methodology is being tested, but I'm sure it can be applied in a big percentage on the other side. So this is how your requirement capture journey and the whole actually software development process should look like. We are doing multiple iterations which are composed of the same set of steps, and those are undefined at the beginning. You don't know how many times you will do an iteration, right? But I guarantee there's no one shot in software development, so it will be more than one for sure. The way an iteration looks like. So what you do first, you have a vision, you have to plan for it, you have to prioritize tasks. What you're going to do as the first concrete task with the customer is to start building in requirements. So you start going there and gathering requirements. You'll need to guide, especially in the first iteration. This is very time consuming. Why? Because the other iterations are going to work over the previously defined requirements versions, all right? So once you have the requirements, you will go and do your design and your analysis. Then you will implement and do some testing during implementation, and then comes the quality acceptance testing. And then you will evaluate, okay, are my requirements gathering the 100% of what the service needs to do? And did I make it right on this round? So when I was gathering requirements, did I respect that on all my phases? And was the testing, did the testing verify those requirements? Right? So it's two things that you test. If any of those answers is no, you will evaluate new tasks again and go around on the second iteration, right? And over again, until you have an escape where you're good to go for deployment. You did everything and you did it right. Yeah, when you arrive to your customer, maybe another department in your company, doesn't need to be different organization. You will hear some phrases, right, which are later are funny to read again, right? So existing documentation is enough as requirement specs. We mentioned that. Well, existing documentation may be 2, 3, 4 years old, and services evolve as you operate them. So be careful with that one. That one is dangerous, right? Department X has the whole picture of the service. This is another common aspect. You need to involve all the stakeholders that are in any way related to the service, because they might be influencing. Yeah, we mentioned this one. Service didn't evolve since design. Well, not so common. So, well, this was supposed to be like that. This is we are proposing a paradigm change in the way services are documented. So traditionally, network services are being documented using PDF files, Word documents, very heavy documents, very hard to find actually what you're looking for. You take a lot of time. It's bulky, it's not so friendly. And when something is not friendly, guess what? It's not used, right? It is very hard to have a feedback loop when something is updated to go back to the documentation. So in the end, you start deviating from the original design. And this documentation, this is why we take it as a good input, but not. It's rendered irrelevant eventually during the project. So what we do, we take a much more dynamic approach. We create with the customer, actually the customer with us. We create dynamic HTML documentation. It has a factor of compression of around 100. So around 500 pages documentation, it's reduced to 5 dynamic HTMLs, right? So that is lightweight, that is dynamic, so it's very visual, it's very easy to follow. Some of you might be already familiar with this kind of documentation. It can be, it's very good for version control. So when we can add new other features like integrated editors for revisions on it. We'll see later an example that we built. So the phase one of the requirement capture journey is about discovering what the service is actually looking like today. And that means that we need to discover the full scope, all the options and configurations that the service is deploying, all the decisions that are being taken, all the considerations. We consider everything, and everything means also the failure scenarios. Like not so long ago, someone was telling me, I code for failure cases. And that makes sense, because you want to know when something fails, you want to know what happened, you want to be verbose about it, right? So you consider even the options that are not likely. So we consider everything. There is no, almost never happens. There's no, normally it's like this. You need to involve all the stakeholders on your customer. So you need to put them in a room and build all this documentation together, right? And you need to be clear about role assignments. So we found that we are only able to do this right when you put responsibilities on the other side as well. So that whenever there is ownership, there is responsibility, and there is engagement, right? This is very important. Okay, so phase one. What we do, we start with sequence diagrams. Sequence diagrams are UML kind of diagram where you express different actions in a sequential order that happen between different actors on the scenario, right? This is very useful for discovering new teams that participate and were not like brought up at the beginning, new elements, flows, these kind of things. Once you do this, you do this typically the first thing. Second thing you start working on is how your service logic, the flow charts are working, right? So typically you will, for a given module, you will start, you will end, and there will be some things in between, right? So this will be decisions that are taken based on whatever we will see later. So you will walk a path, and typically, but not always, you will end up applying some configuration templates, right? There is no NSO here yet, so this is service. This is completely 100% before NSO, right? What did I do? Okay. So you also want to collect this at this stage, the templates, and these are templates that are probably parameterized already, or not even that, they're carrying actual values. We don't mind. We just need to identify them to process later, right? On the phase two, which is about identifying the automation components. So now you know what the service looks like. Now you need to know what the NSO service is going to look like, right? So you start with the templates. The templates need to be parameterized. So you need to identify the attributes, variables, whatever you want to call it. So you need to see the parts that are going to change over time, right? And between instances. Once you identify the attributes, you need to define the characteristics on all of them. And we do this with working with a table of parameters. And then you need to define the decision points in the logic flow based on something, based on actual things, parameters, service options, etc. So now we are parameterizing the templates as we spoke. We work on the variables table, and we turn these decisions that we were making in something specific based on some parameter, the value or whatever. So once this is ready, now it's time for optimization. Can we reduce can we strip some branches off? Can we consolidate? Can we do anything before? While keeping in mind that we need to reconcile what's on the network, right? And then for each iteration, you are here on the at the end of the green arrow, you need to sign off that the requirements. And only then you will work on the rest of the iteration, right? Based on these requirements that you signed off. So basically, when you arrived in the customer, you say that your existing service documentation is, well, it's not good enough for requirements, right? So, yeah, you get this kind of reaction. What do you mean? My service is documented. Right? So you tell the customer, okay, you need to work on this, and you are the owner of this new documentation. So they go like, why should I work on this? Why is it my responsibility? And typically the feeling there in this phase is frustration, right? Frustration towards you, and eventually frustration to their own processes. How are we doing things, and why are we doing it this way when it's not maybe optimal, right? Eventually this phase goes on, and they think actually this kind of makes sense, right? They start feeling identified with the methodology, and they start asking questions. How can we, why are we doing this? Why don't we do that, etc. Right? And finally, you know, this one, they embrace the methodology, and then it is very weird that they will want to go back to PDFs and Word files. So if I have some time, I would like to show actual example of this documentation. So it's going to be fast, I hope. So it should be here. This is the kind of documentation that we are building. We have an internal tool to automatically build this type of documentation. So what we work, we use this as a reference for the whole development cycle. So this is where we sign off requirements, where what we use as a reference for development, and what we use as a reference for later QA and testing, right? So what is here is what is going to be done. What is not here doesn't exist. Right? So you have a diagram, typically, some actions, some templates. We have some parameter markup. We have parameter validation that is working, and we typically have several modules, right? So this is all text-based, so it is good for storing in Git repositories, for example. So you can do several modules for the same service. You can use PlantUML, maybe you are familiar with that. So this also takes as input this, and you can well, do every kind of documentation that you want. You can do sequence diagrams, as we saw before. Any kind, right? So yeah, I think I'm done. Yeah, so.
Very good. Thank you, Jorge and Sandeep and Mark.